You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 388, and in this one I got on Sara, who kindly agreed to share her OCD story with us. In particular, she talks about sexual orientation themed OCD, harm themed OCD, existential themed OCD, relationship themed OCD, and we also discuss death anxiety. She discusses dealing with panic disorder, depersonalisation, getting a diagnosis, going through dialectical behaviour therapy, or DBT for short. She discusses intrusive thoughts and compassion for her younger self. A really heartfelt story. I think it will resonate with many of you. And thank you to our podcast partners, NoCD. And NoCD is celebrating 3 years of partnering with this podcast. And in honour of this anniversary, NoCD have offered people in the UK a special deal because I am a UK citizen. So to honour the 3-year partnership, they are offering new members in the UK a reduced rate of $32 US dollars, or roughly about £25 sterling, per 60-minute session if you start therapy before the 31st of July. You'll be able to continue treatment at this discounted rate for 2 months. To access this reduced rate, schedule a free call with their team and mention the code OCD Stories. That's code OCD Stories to get this discount. And you can find out more by going to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD Stories. So thank you to NoCD for offering some of my listeners this great discount. And of course, if you're in the UK currently, NoCD don't take private healthcare. So hopefully this discount helps you access therapy. And of course, if you're in the States, NoCD take a lot of healthcare plans. So go to their website to find out if you're covered. And of course, thank you to you guys, as always, for listening. I deeply appreciate it. And thank you to Sara for her story and her time. Without further ado, here she is. Welcome to the podcast, Sara.
Thank you, Stu. I will just start by saying it's been a really long journey of healing and discovery when it comes to OCD. And I've always been a really anxious person. I know that for sure. I remember my earliest memories of being anxious or experiencing anxiety goes back to maybe 4 or 5 years old. And it's interesting because I don't have a lot of memories of being 4 or 5, but I do remember the feeling of anxiety. So that was quite significant to me and tells me that it really lives in my body. I remember being at social events and family gatherings and having such a stomach ache. And that feeling, I swear, sticks with me today. I have that just achy, sour stomach feeling. And looking around, everyone's having a great time. Maybe it's Christmas, maybe it's a birthday. And there was this one time I remember my sister said, "Can't you just have fun? Come on, let's just have fun." And I distinctly remember in my 5-year-old brain thinking, I wish I could just have fun. And I don't know why I'm so anxious right now, or maybe not the word anxious, but I don't know why I feel so sick right now. So it really started at a very young age for me. I was quite shy. My parents divorced around that time as well. So I was experiencing that trauma. And it wasn't amicable. So there were things going on in the house that I'm told now. I obviously wasn't, well, I'm not sure if I was privy to back then, but I'm sure I felt it in some way. But I did know that there was quite a discord between my parents and there was a huge custody battle. So there was that going on as well. So I think maybe, and through CBT and just talking to other healthcare professionals, that was probably a catalyst. It was probably a trigger for everything else that would ensue, that would follow. So that's really where I would say it started. And then As far as adolescence concerned, like I don't really remember experiencing any sort of intrusive thoughts until, I want to say, probably somewhere around high school. High school is when I started to have my first bout of intrusive thoughts, and that's where the sexual orientation OCD theme emerged, which now looking back kind of makes sense, because it's like you're an adolescent, you're a teenager, and hormones and whatnot. However, what made this interesting, I was in a relationship at the time, and I remember asking him, like, oh my God, like, I don't want to have sex. Like, am I gay? Like, does that make me gay? And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, no. And I was just harping on it. I would harp on it. I would harp on it. And I couldn't figure out why. And it would fleet. It would go in and out, in and out. Not super, super bothersome, but just beating myself up for not wanting to be intimate with him. And not even considering, like, oh, this is just the wrong relationship for me. Like, I'm just not maybe, attracted to this person in that way. And I just distinctly remember that probably around 17 is when it emerged. And I went off to college, and up in Massachusetts, and that's where it really, really started to ramp up. Probably, I would say freshman to beginning of junior year is really when things started to escalate as far as the SOCD is concerned. And I was, again, fully like heterosexual, never once like even wanted to consider engaging with a woman in a sexual way. And that's what made it so painfully confusing to me. And I would just dig and doubt myself, and try, and so many compulsions as far as, going back in my memory and saying, wait, I thought this person was attractive, and because I thought he was attractive, like, that means that I'm okay, and like that means that I'm not gay, and just back and forth, and all sorts of, mostly memory compulsions, I would say, like just going back in my mind. And then obviously like looking around and checking, like, oh yeah, he's hot, right? Like, oh, okay, like she's just pretty, like that's what I'm thinking. But I don't think well, no, I know I didn't understand what was happening truly at the time, which is I was experiencing the loop of intrusive thoughts. I just thought, like, okay, I've always doubted myself. I've never been sure of myself. I've never had a really sturdy sense of self and confidence. Like, this is just me. This is just me as a young adult experiencing this. Like, this is what this is. But once it started to get to the point where I just couldn't function, I couldn't be in public. I would just like look around, and I would just, any girl I would see, it would be a compulsion. And then I'd be like, oh my God, am I looking at her boobs? Am I looking at her butt? Am I looking at this? Am I looking at that? And then immediately doing a memory compulsion. No, 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 no. Like, just fighting against it, fighting against the current. And again, meanwhile, through this entire experience, was in relationships with men, never had the urge to want to be intimate with a woman. So I'm like, why? Like, the thoughts and my actions weren't matching up, and I'm like, there's something wrong here. During college, I also started to experience a really deep depression my freshman year as well. And I'm sure that now in hindsight, it was probably part and parcel of experiencing the intrusive thinking. Like, it was probably so intense, and my brain kind of shut down. And I was starting to experience harm OCD. And that was the second theme that emerged for me. Where I'd be in my dorm room and I would be so afraid that I would go grab scissors or a razor or a pencil or something sharp and hurt myself. And my roommate at the time was not very understanding, and not of any fault of her own. She just was probably trying to deal with this as much as I was. But I remember posting a piece of paper next to my bed saying like life is worth living or something like that, just as like a visual cue, like a visual reminder to just hang in there, because I just was short circuiting. Like my brain was just completely just not working properly. And I wasn't medicated at this point. Up to this point, I was not medicated. And yeah, it got so bad. I ended up transferring, and twice actually. So after that, I ended up going to Arizona State for a semester and a half, still experiencing the SOCD, still experiencing the harm OCD, a little bit of like existentialism OCD kind of playing into that. So then I left Arizona State and ended up in the city in New York at a small liberal arts college on the Upper East Side to try to pursue musical theater, because that's what I did in high school, and I was going to try to do it professionally at one point. I didn't get into their program, but I figured, oh, I'll be in the city and it'll be great. And there is when things got really dicey. I think this was like the beginning of the end for me. So this was January of 2007. And I was self-medicating with alcohol and smoking weed and just substances, like just numbing and trying to battle all of those different intrusive thoughts that I was experiencing. Still not quite understanding what was happening, still not seeking help at that point. I had a social worker back at home that I had been seeing from when my dad had gotten remarried to my stepmom years before. So he was like our family social worker. And I still speak to him today because I feel like he's somebody who honestly saved me. But I hadn't reached out to him yet. So I was on my own, unmedicated, not being treated, no therapy, just drinking, smoking, out on the town in New York City at, like the ripe age of, I guess at this point I was 20, and experiencing all of these thoughts. And I was a mess. I somehow made it through the semester. And that summer, things started to get worse with the thoughts. That summer, I got an internship at a translations agency in the city, where I was translating things from English to French, French to English. And I distinctly remember the moment where it all happened. And I was feeling super anxious, like physically, like tingly fingers, like hot and cold all over. I couldn't handle the thoughts anymore. I couldn't manage them anymore. I didn't know that I didn't need to manage them at that point, so it was really just me pushing them out, which of course we know makes it worse. And I went to the bathroom and I looked in the mirror, and it was like a Marvel movie. I was like, oh my God, am I turning gay? And I was like, do I look gay? Do I look like a man? Like I was completely freaking out. Like, and that was the first time I've ever depersonalized. Like it was one of the scariest moments of my life up to this point, and putting it into words doesn't do it justice. And for listeners, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have probably experienced this, so you know what I mean. But I just was so outside of myself and so outside of my body that I didn't understand what was happening. And I just felt like I was somebody else and didn't recognize who I was. Like, I think the thoughts maybe got into my subconscious so much that my subconscious started believing this was true. And I just remember standing there in the mirror and freaking out. And there was this one girl that I was friends with, and she went to go check on me. And I was like, I've got to get out of here. And I just left. I bolted. And I went back home, and I tried to go back into the city for the internship. And there was just a couple days later, my dad had dropped me off at the train station. And I remember, like, in my head thinking, like, oh my God, am I going to jump on the tracks? Am I going to just throw myself onto the tracks? Do I want to die? Do I want to kill myself? So all of those thoughts started to emerge at the same time. That summer was really, really hard. I did start, I believe, talk therapy again with my social worker. And it would kind of help, kind of not. I worked for my stepdad a little bit that summer as well, before going back to college. And yeah, I ended up going back in the fall. This is my senior year at this point. I think my timeline's a little wonky now that I'm thinking about it. No, well, it doesn't much matter.
But it's all good. Only you know the timeline, right?
Yeah, so. Nobody, exactly. But yeah. It was like, it was very confusing because I transferred so many times. It was like my freshman year was all in Massachusetts. And then sophomore year was split up between Arizona State home and the city. And then junior year, yeah, that's right. So I'm sorry, it was after Marymount. So junior year, I skipped a year. Junior year was actually all back at UMass. I went back up to Massachusetts. Which just shows my instability at the time. Like, I was just all over the place. I didn't know, I was just running and I didn't know where to go. So this was now senior year. So this was fall 2007, right? Okay. And I'm coming off the internship. I'm in a serious relationship, a very serious relationship with this guy. And he's back at home. He's a year older than me. So he already has a job in the city, like a big finance job. And we're seeing each other as much as possible. He's coming up to see me. I'm going down to see him. And it was probably around September 2007 when I started to feel like I wasn't in love with him anymore. So then this kind of, like, I guess this is where the relationship OCD started to emerge. So my themes were just shape-shifting so much. Like, it was just in and out, taking different forms. And the relationship OCD was telling me, you're not in love with him anymore. And then, of course, that sparked the SOCD saying, well, that probably means that you're gay and you're in the wrong relationship and you're living a lie and you're living the wrong life. And then the harm OCD came into play, saying, well, then you should probably just kill yourself because you're confused and you don't know what to do. And it was this whole big mishmash. I think, like, it was like meeting of the minds of all my different themes coming together, being like, okay, Sarah, like, you're done for, like, this is the end. And I crashed. I just completely crashed. I absolutely stopped functioning. I couldn't go to class. I was in my apartment room and couldn't leave. I would sit in the closet. I remember at one point I took a hammer to my mirror because I was so frustrated and so scared and so angry and not knowing what to do and being far from home. I sought out mental health services at my college, and they were wildly unhelpful, unfortunately. So this is a call to anybody out there who wants to be a counselor in a college. Like, if you have a passion for it, please do it, because there's, limited, I think, people out there that truly know what they're doing, and hopefully, a handful that do and care. But this person, maybe they were early in their career or whatnot, so I shouldn't blame them. But it was a bad time for me to have somebody sit down with me and talk to me and say, well, have you ever considered, like, maybe you are gay? And I'm like, obviously I've considered that. Like, like this bad, there's been years where I'm just like, what's happening to my brain? Like, why am I thinking these things, but my actions aren't matching up? But when he said that, it was just sort of an adrenaline rush from the tips of my toes to the top of my head, like complete physical response to that question. And that was just such a trigger. And that just put me back into the loop. And, the person wasn't considering, like, oh, maybe the pattern of this person obsessing over these things but not taking action, maybe this is something like an OCD symptom. Like, they weren't maybe educated in that way or knowledgeable in OCD enough to tell me that. So that was a bust. So then I'm like, okay, well, that's not working. So then I sought out a private therapist in the area, and she was kind of helpful. I truly don't remember too much of our sessions together. I don't think I had a negative experience with her, but she still wasn't really touching upon what was happening, really, what I figured out was happening, really. So at that point, I cut my losses and I ended up getting medicated. I contacted a psychiatrist back at home, tried a bunch of medications, SSRIs, and ended up taking, am I able to take telic medication?
Yeah.
Luvox, which saved my life. And it was really hard in the beginning because, as many people know, trying medications for the first time is tricky, and I didn't respond well to a lot of them, and it was really discouraging. And I hadn't come home yet. So Luvox finally started working, and Luvox plus, I don't even know what I was using for like panic attacks at that time, but maybe a Xanax or something like that. But it really started to level me. And I came home because I obviously couldn't function anymore, and got help and started seeing my social worker, our family social worker. And in between the time of me, or I would say during the time, in the beginning of me seeing him and really starting to figure out what was happening, like, I would Google on my own. And this is why I kind of felt like coming here and speaking to you and speaking to all of the listeners is important, because I really felt like until I had the conversations with my social worker back at home, no one ever told me that there's something out there called, excuse me, pure OCD, until I started to dig and unfortunately Google, which is the worst thing to do. But in that case, it was the most helpful thing to me in that moment. I would just search like repetitive thinking or obsessive thinking about sexual orientation, excessive thinking about relationships. And finally I found, I think it was like, excuse me, that institute out in LA. There's like some institute.
Oh, OCDLA, is it?
Probably.
And there's a few of them, I should caveat. So
yeah. And it led to their page, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is my life on this page. And it was this moment of like, wait a second, I'm not going crazy. Like, I haven't been living a lie. Like, this is what's happening to me. So I took it to my social worker, and he's like, this makes sense to me. Like this is matching up. Um, he definitely, obviously, like at this point, knew I had an anxiety disorder. And prior, I didn't even touch upon this, but prior, like earlier in my teenage years, he had diagnosed me with borderline personality disorder because of the anxiety, the ups and downs in the mood, um, the impulsivity, the promiscuity, and abusing substances. Sorry. And he kind of debunked that at the time. He was just like, okay, well, I'm thinking like you kind of outgrew that diagnosis. I don't think it's quite accurate anymore. Like you managed to do enough work where that's kind of not really what's presenting at this point from like a DSM-5 like point of view. So we really started to dig deep into the OCD piece of it, and he was really the person to, with medication, was the person that really started to teach me what my brain was doing, and understanding, like almost like when you get a new car, like this is how it works. And I'm so grateful for him for that, because he would always give me the analogy of like your brain being like a nightclub or a bar, and the bouncer, is checking IDs. Okay, you can come in, you can't come in, you're too young, you're of age, whatever, go ahead. And he's like, your brain, your OCD brain is like a lazy bouncer, basically. And he or she, they're just letting anybody in. Yep, come on in, come on in, come on in. And you're not able to filter thoughts that are reality for you and thoughts that are just thoughts. And so he started teaching me about that, and he started teaching me about like not accepting every thought that comes through my brain, sitting with my thoughts, more mindfulness, acceptance, and just
commitment therapy.
Yeah, exactly. And just exactly. And really just working on that, just thoughts are thoughts. And it's been a really, really bumpy road. And I am just like still figuring all of this out. And COVID really threw a wrench in things. And that summer of COVID is when I experienced serious panic disorder. And that's when I ended up getting intensive outpatient therapy through this program. And because all the themes kind of started coming back. So I'm kind of going out of order here, but I'll go back. So from the time that I started seeing him, senior year, finishing out senior year of college, going into, my early days of being a young adult in the working world, things were good. Things were good. Things were stable through CBT and medication. Very, very little. Like I remember there was a chunk of time where I did not experience any sort of intrusive loop. And it was like, wow, this is possible. But then of course, like the what ifs came, like, okay, well, what if it comes back? So it was always there. It was always this like shadow behind me. And I've been, so when I was 21, so a couple years after I started kind of stabilizing and working with my therapist, social worker, is when I met my now husband. So we've been together for 15 years, and he's seen so much, poor guy. But yeah, I surprisingly like haven't really experienced the obsessions as much. Like once he and I started dating, and I mean, in and out of like doubting for sure of like, is this right? Or am I doing, is this the right relationship for me? Or should I be married? Or should I, like, I remember like he proposed to me and I had like a full on panic attack, which I don't know how many people can relate to that. But yeah, that was, I remember like walking into the house and he proposed and I had like every single OCD theme happen at the very same time in that same moment. And he's like, are you going to say anything? And I guess like, several minutes went by and I was like, yes, yes, of course, yes. But my brain did not want to trust that at all. And my brain still doesn't really trust it. I mean, I think we're getting there, but yeah, like my point in telling this is that like I got to a place where I could recognize they were obsessions finally. Mostly because I wasn't acting on any of them. Like there was never like, okay, well, let me try. Like there was never the follow-up. There was never the action piece of the thought. So yeah, and then we've been married since 2016, happily. We have 2 children. And I still experience many of those themes today. And yeah, and I guess I'm really going out of order here. You're gonna have to do some good editing too.
I'll leave it as it is.
It's okay. I'll pause. But yeah, I didn't talk about DBT yet, but DBT is also extremely helpful in my recovery and my healing from OCD, which is surprising because I didn't know anything about it. And I thought it was just for people who were either suicidal or had like serious addiction issues. Like I just didn't know. So yeah, so over the years, managing it well enough, having a healthy life, married, and then summer 2020, was that it? 20, no, when did COVID hit?
Yeah, 2020.
2020, summer of 2020. A lovely new theme emerged for me, which was death OCD. And I've always been like really sensitive, like just to any sort of sensation in my body, like just very in tune, very highly sensitive person, always. Even going back to 4 or 5-year-old Sara with stomach aches. But COVID really, really hit me hard in that I saw all of these people get so sick and die and die. And there wasn't any hiding from that. We're putting the news on and we're seeing just these death tolls, right? These rates that it was just insane. And everything just came back to the surface, like as far as like just feeling so unsafe in my environment, so unsafe in my body, just so incredibly scared that I was going to get sick and die. And I remember I'd have like, I still have this sometimes, but I would have this like narrative that I created and I could like almost play it out, like my daughter saying like to her friends years down the road, like, oh, I was 2 when my mommy died. Like I would have like vivid narratives that I would create and they would just become so real to me. And I started having these intense panic attacks, like multiple panic attacks a day. This was probably June or July of 2020. And it got to the point where my team, my social worker, my now social worker, who's different than the social worker that I was seeing as a younger person, and my psychiatrist, they were working together at the time, saying like, this is kind of like, we're going to have to pass the baton. Like, this isn't something that we can manage for you anymore. We think something a bit more than what we can offer. So that's when they suggested going into this program called Gen Psych, which also really helped so much, tremendously. So I can't say enough good things about them and the folks over there. And DBT therapy was just incredibly helpful because it gave those concrete skills. And I think that's what I needed right now. Like I at that moment, I was just so outside of myself. I couldn't be alone. I felt like I was walking on eggshells with myself. I couldn't take a step in any sort of direction. I felt like I was going to just die, like really, truly die. And, you know, was just calling the ambulance multiple times a week, and they would come and they would check my my vitals, and you know, they were so nice about it. Thank goodness. But terrible, just terrible panic. Couldn't drive. Would have to pull over multiple times during a drive to collect myself, because I like would picture myself driving off the road, or like think that I already had driven off the road and I was in some sort of dream state. Like it was just so much like depersonalizing and panic and intrusive thinking about just dying and death and harm and just unsafe everything everywhere all at once, that I couldn't function again. So the DBT therapy really helped me to, and it was intense. It was like 10 weeks, and I was in sessions from like 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. like every day. And they just kind of like talked me through skills, and I still use so many of those skills today, like TIP, you know, like the temperature intensive exercise, progressive muscle relaxation. It gave me access to those strategies that could de-escalate me, because I was so emotionally dysregulated at that point. And from there, you know, I had my daughter. I had a daughter at that point. She was almost 1. She was turning 1. So I was also postpartum. And then 3 years went by, and I, you know, was working on these skills, and the panic would return, and I would have to kind of reset and work the DBT skills again. And it was a lot of that. Like, and I think that's one thing I can really like attest to, is that this truly, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess you can look at it in a positive way, but it's not a destination type of situation. It's constantly building and rebuilding. And I think that's where I get frustrated with myself, because, you know, even today, I've been having, you know, my themes come back, like literally today. And I have to learn how to be compassionate with myself and say, okay, Sarah, like, you've been through this before. This is not your first rodeo. You have all of these skills that you can use to sit with the thoughts, let the thoughts flow, you know, watch them go down the river in your mind and let them pass. And then you can resume your regularly scheduled programming of your day. But like, it's still so real every single day, and such a struggle every single day to just trust myself and trust my brain and trust my body that I'm safe, because I'm constantly feeling unsafe.
Yeah.
That's a lot. I don't even think any of that made sense.
It did. Yeah.
Well,
yeah. So, look, how's that going?
No, you go, please.
Well, yeah, let me sorry, clear my throat. Yeah, I mean, that was, yeah, loads of detail. I love that. And I guess I'm just curious, if we wind it all the way back to 5-year-old Sarah, the one that was getting all those tummy aches and anxiety. Of course, at that time, she wouldn't have called it anxiety, most likely. Yeah, the examples you gave, they were always like Christmas, birthday parties, celebrations. Was it always those sort of things, or was it just generally that was happening to her?
I think mostly bigger things, mostly bigger events for sure. Those stood out in my mind the most.
Okay.
But yeah, I was always the kid. I was never the kid that was like ready to go. You know what I mean? Like just ready to jump into a situation. I was always the kid that was kind of like hanging behind my dad or my mom's leg, or like I was just more cautious when it came to pretty much everything. And I think that the divorce and what had happened at the time, I think really kind of just triggered that feeling of unsafety and uncertainty and instability. Like it was a lot of back and forth, like me going from one place to another, moving a lot. I moved like 5 times in a span of like 7 years. Like it was a lot of instability. And I just didn't, I don't think I think that's where like the distrust came from as well. Like it was just years and years of just not being able to trust that things were stable, and that kind of translated to this distrust of my own brain, of just not being able to trust my own thoughts and my sense of self. I think it all kind of ties together, is how I kind of see it now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And it's tough for a young kid to, especially if they're highly sensitive, to not know what's going on and the instability. And
yeah, it was. And I've always been very, very sensitive, and just really, really tough. And I've been trying to do a bit of like inner child work on my own, not with my now social worker. But a little bit with her. She's not trained in it, but like she helps me through it, walks me through it, is obviously very knowledgeable and can you know, unofficially help me with stuff like that. But like it comes down to, I think with OCD, like realizing that it doesn't matter the theme, it's all just the same. And not, I think that took me a really, really long time to understand that, because I would get so caught up in the detail. Like, why? I remember just like, why sexual orientation? Like, why? I'm like screaming at my old social worker, why is it this? It's so random. Like, why? Why is it this? I've like never like, you know, been intimate with a woman, never wanted to be intimate with a woman, never like thought about that. Like, why this? And he's like, it doesn't matter. Like, it just doesn't matter. Like, it can be, you know, you're an alien from outer space, and like that's just maybe what your brain latches onto. It's just a symptom of anxiety, and it's just a way of your brain trying to protect itself. And you've just got an overactive system. Like that's just what's happening. And it's up to you, Sarah, to say, hey brain, thank you, but I'm okay and I'm safe. Thank you so much for being so worried about me, but we're okay here. I know what's happening. Like this is what's happening, and I'm okay. So that's something I have to like remind myself daily. Just like one, that like all themes are created equal. Like all themes just kind of all filter back into that space of
uncertainty.
Distrust. Sorry,
distrust. I said uncertainty, but
uncertainty.
Distrust.
Not being able to tolerate the uncertainty of just, I have a deep, deep intolerance of uncertainty. And that's what I've learned about myself. I can't handle it. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I can. I think it's on a spectrum, and I think that some people's like window of tolerance for uncertainty is much greater than others, and mine is way lower end of that curve, of that spectrum. I just sometimes need to know. And especially with like the death OCD stuff, like my current social worker is like, I find it so interesting that even though you can't get the answer for this, you're still thinking about it. You're still looking for an answer. You're still digging, and you're digging to nowhere because you won't know. And I don't have an answer for her. Like, I don't know why I keep digging. I don't know why I keep questioning. I assume it's just, again, an attempt to feel safe. I don't know. I think it all maybe just is filtering back to that little Sara looking for safety.
That's it. It's not really about death, because like he or she, they're saying there is no answer here, but it part of your brain probably knows it's not about the death, so it's there is an answer for what it's really about, maybe. And I'm not, I don't want to be dragged over the coals here, and I'm not saying it by the audience, not necessarily you or other therapists, but I'm not saying all OCD comes back to like childhood development issues or parenting or anything like that. But I think for some people it may do, and here we're saying maybe you had a predisposition to OCD, but then maybe the arguments that started before the divorce, and then the divorce at, was it 5, did you say, or 7?
Between 4 and 5.
Oh, wow. So, yeah, okay. So those, from the age of 2, even birth, there might have been really unsettled home environment for you, which would have created tons of, as a baby and then toddler, discomfort, anxiety, and then so when you say it's really hard for me to experience anxiety and distress, it's like no wonder, because it might be tapping in to the child that's still within you, that's anyway, that's how I would kind of look at it, or at least throw it out as a theory if I was your therapist. And I see that in a lot of my clients, not all, but many. There's stuff.
Yeah. Do you find that it's mostly the highly sensitive people that latch on to that a bit more?
Yeah. I mean, highly sensitive people, I can't remember the study. I think there's a study, or someone threw a percentage out there, but it overlaps quite a lot with OCD anyway. But yeah, I think if you are highly sensitive, then I mean, some people could go through a divorce and it wouldn't bother them at all. I mean, it might upset them, but it's not going to cause any issues. But then if someone's highly sensitive, it could be really, really tough for them, just not knowing,
Yeah. And that certainly was the issue for me. And then my mom ended up getting remarried, and I didn't know him really that well at the time. And then we moved away. We moved like an hour away. It was a lot. There was a lot of things in there, and things that people have told me that I don't even remember. Like, apparently, like, my dad had child protective services come in and evaluate my mom, and my mom was extremely hurt by that. As any mother would be. I can't even imagine that happening, but like, I don't remember that. Like, just things like my dad refusing to leave the house, and my aunts on my mom's sisters coming in and staying and trying to like get him out. Like, so where was I don't know, like in my room, like I have no idea. So there's a lot, and I think there's a lot of holes, a lot of things I don't know, a lot of things that have happened that I probably have buried, and I'm not able to access them. I don't know if I'll ever be able to access them. But I do. That's why I feel like anytime anybody asks me about the anxiety piece, I always go back to 4-year-old Sara, because I feel like those stomach aches were such a significant sign of something not right.
Mm.
And it was such a signal, and I'm so thankful to that stomach ache, because it prompted me to need to address it and take care of myself today. I'm so tied to that feeling, because the anxiety for me, going back to the highly sensitive piece, just is so alive in my body. Like it lives in my body.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot for me, and luckily the DBT skills and all of those emotion regulation types of tools and strategies, and CBT, and I've considered trying exposure response for the death OCD stuff, but I actually made an appointment with NOCD, but canceled it because I got scared. I got too scared. But I will try it. I think I'm going to just take a deep breath and give it a try.
Well, that's
not
it.
Not an ad, by the way.
No, but a good therapist, especially one that does ERP, shouldn't ever push you to do something you don't want to do. That's a common fear of people who, not saying you, but others who, when I've heard it, they don't want to do ERP. It's like, no therapist should be forcing you to do anything. It should always be in collaboration, and you should be the one pushing yourself, not the therapist. The therapist is there just to nudge you and encourage you and challenge you a bit, but they should never, ever force you into it, which worries some people. But just go with it, create a hierarchy. And if you don't want to do it, you don't want to do it. But at least you gave it a go,
I think I need to, because I think right now in my life, like, that's probably the theme. And again, all themes are created equal, but that's what's nagging at me the most. And it really disrupts my peace. It really does, because I'm just constantly thinking, like, any little sensation in my body is a heart attack, a stroke, a this, a that. Oh, am I going to die this afternoon? I could, like, working theories like the possibility versus probability thing, right? Is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? No. Or like the neutralizing of, like, maybe I will die this afternoon, maybe I won't die this afternoon. I don't know, but I'm not going to try to figure that out right now. I do that a lot for, like, the sexual orientation OCD as well, like just trying to neutralize it and live with it and sit with it, and not try to figure it out, not try to figure out why that's a theme or why I'm specifically worried about that. But it's been a really interesting journey of self-discovery, and I'm just glad that I had, like, a team of therapists that were able to support me in this, and able to give me tools and validation that what you're feeling is valid, what you're feeling is real. You're not you're not going crazy, because can't even count on 2 hands and 2 feet how many times I've asked that. And reminding me that everything that I feel in any given moment is temporary, and that it'll pass. It'll pass, and it's just a storm, and you'll weather the storm. It'll pass. You'll get through it. And also just so happy that I decided to Google that one day. The only time Google's ever helped me is that one day where I was like, excessive, intrusive, repetitive thinking. And I can't believe that. I think now, I mean, what is this, like more than 10 years later, but I think now there's more information out there, and you could probably know more about that than I, but I don't know. I feel like back in, like, the early 2000s, there wasn't a lot of information out there.
There wasn't.
Specifically pure OCD, right?
Yeah, especially videos. I
couldn't find anything. I just couldn't find, and I can't believe I stumbled upon it. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is my life. This is my life. This is me. Here's what I'm going through. Wow. So that was just gave me such a peace of mind to kind of latch on to like connect my experience with something concrete that I can now tackle and work with.
Yeah. I mean, Google has its uses.
Yeah,
It's
not
just
many.
but what you said earlier about trying to figure out what was going on for you when you were like before 4 and 5, and I guess the thing I wanted to share is I don't think you need to, because I think people can get really stuck in that place, including myself historically. Because if it is something to do with the younger you, it will come up in the here and now. So where you say you still get those tummy issues, or you still, and when that stuff comes up or the anxiety comes up now, that if you're compassionate to that energy, feeling, whatever it is, in some way you are rewriting the history for that younger you. And that nervous system will calm down, and in some way she is healed, so you can work with her in the here and now. You never need to kind of intellectually know.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
No worries. Yeah. It's tough work, but
it's really, and you know what, and I'm sure you can attest this too with your clients and maybe even yourself, is just, I think a lot of the time, I even said this to my husband yesterday, like I'm tired of doing the work. Like sometimes I wish I could just live without thinking about it. And it's a full-time job managing it a lot of the time. And I think that piece of it also can cause a little bit of depression at times, dips of depression, periods of depression, just days of sadness. It's tough. It's really, really hard work. And I never stop working. I never stop working at it. And I won't, because I don't want to give up on myself, obviously. And there's people that depend on me and my 2 little ones. And it's a battle. It's a battle. And I am predisposed to it. I forgot to mention, like my mother's mom, my grandmother, she was actually institutionalized for OCD.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Back in the mid-20s, down in South Jersey, there was an institution in Vineland, actually. And she was like, I think cleanliness was what they were calling it. So I've been predisposed, and I have had a lot of things happen to spark it. But despite that, and those are really big things to fight against, but it's a daily practice of mindfulness. That's like my biggest takeaway, I think. Daily practice of mindfulness and being present and letting the thoughts flow. Let those thoughts flow. That's what I'll leave with.
And so did you say it was your nan that was institutionalized? I can't speak. Or your great nan?
My grandmother, yeah.
Your grandmother, okay. Wow, I dread to think what that would have been like at that time.
Yeah, I mean,
standards weren't quite what they are now.
No, it was closed down, from what I understand. Like,
a lot of them are,
yeah. I mean, I don't even want to begin to think about, like, my imagination has run wild of like what she maybe went through. I just know it was a really unpleasant experience, and she was there for quite a while, years. So it.
Well, I mean, as I said, there's something in that though around, I hate to say gratitude, but like, I know at times in the various countries, there's definitely major issues with healthcare systems and access to therapy and all of that. But compared to what it was 100 years ago, we are a bazillion. Even if you have no access to anything else, just having the internet and all the free resources, podcasts, YouTube videos, like compared to what your nan would have gone through, is hugely different.
Absolutely. The instant access to tools, to therapeutic tools to get you through really difficult moments are, you're right. The gratitude I have for that is tremendous.
No, that's great to hear. So if you could pick up the phone, you could pick up the phone and call the 5-year-old you. What would you tell her?
It's gonna make me cry. Wow. Okay. Wow. Yeah, I get emotional just thinking about that. Sorry.
No, you don't have to
Um,
apologize.
I, oh,
What does she need to hear?
yeah, wow. She needs to hear a lot. Um, I would tell her that she does not need anybody or anything but herself to feel safe
Mm.
and to feel at peace and to feel secure. Everything she needs, I would say, anything you need, Sarah, anything you need to feel safe and secure is already inside of you. And you can access that safety and peace whenever you need to, whatever happens around you. And what's happening right now is really hard, is really confusing, but also you're a tough cookie and you're going to be able to not only get through this, but you're going to thrive and you're going to go on to do great things and be a loving parent and wife and friend to many. And it's going to be okay. That's what I would tell her.
Hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then slight change of direction. So you've got a billboard where you are. What do you want written on that billboard?
Ah,
Could be anything in the world.
oh man. I have to go back to my love for Oasis on this one and just be here now.
Hmm. Nice.
Be here now. I think that's something I would want to constantly see.
Hmm.
Wherever
Yeah.
here is, be here.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
Mm.
Cool. And then lastly, anything else you wish you could have said or shared today?
Oh, um, I think I really shared a lot of what I wanted to say. I mean, such mumble jumbled thoughts, but so hard to kind of think back to everything that's happened. And
Hmm.
um, I think I just want to share really that um, just in general, like it's really, really hard to talk about OCD. And anybody who has it knows that. And I almost didn't come here today. So nervous. I've never publicly shared my story. Not many people know my themes.
Hmm.
Um, and I just still don't feel like 100% confident and courageous enough to like openly talk about my themes because of judging and people not understanding and taking it the wrong way.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, I felt it so important to come here to speak to you. I mean, not only because I think the work you do is absolutely incredible. So thank you for just
Thank you.
doing this, because your podcast and the stories of everybody who's been on it and the doctors and all of your guests have been such a tremendous piece in my healing. Like, so I just want to say, like, if you're somebody out there that is reluctant to share your story, to share it, to really consider sharing it, because people need to hear that they're not alone and that this is real, and it's a real, unfortunately, real disorder that
Hmm.
people experience. And it doesn't make us bad people, it doesn't make us broken people, it just makes us people. And we need each other to get through OCD, because it's heavy lifting.
Hmm. True. Yeah. It's easier to lift together.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and just being so open and vulnerable. Resonated with me, and I know it will therefore resonate with a lot of my audience.
I hope so. Thank you, Stu.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us with a one-time tip/donation, please go to theocdstories.com/support. All tips, no matter how large or small, are greatly appreciated. Please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/theOCD stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.